Welcome to the All Things AI podcast. My name is Ishan, and I'm the host. This is the 19th episode of the All Things AI podcast, and here with us today is Dr. Titilola Olojede, a lecturer at the National Open University of Nigeria and an AI policy research fellow at the Center for AI and Digital Policy. Welcome to the channel, and it's an honor to have you here today.
Yeah, Ishan, thank you so much for having me. I feel privileged to be speaking on all things AI. Thank you.
For this opportunity. And I'll just start off by asking, how's your day going so far?
Yeah, it's been very fine. It's evening in Nigeria and work has technically ended.
Yeah, it's like, I guess around midday here, so the timing works out perfect, even though we're in different time zones. But
Oh, great then. Nice.
with that being said, I want to get into the first portion of today's interview, which is just going to be focused around ethical processes for training AI models. And I think one thing that's been brought up in recent times is OpenAI's case with the New York Times. This was a few months ago, but the entire idea behind this was that OpenAI used New York Times data without their consent and breached copyright laws. And when it comes to things like large language models, they often need to be trained on millions of data samples, especially things like ChatGPT. And oftentimes, this leaves there a lot of room for things like privacy violations and the breaching of copyright laws, which are obviously a danger to AI developers. So my first question is, what steps can AI developers take to avoid facing issues, including privacy and copyright issues?
Thank you very much, Ishan. That's a great question. First, when developers are conceiving, it starts from the process of the period of conception of the idea. Then from conception to design, to development, to deployment. First, at that very stage, nascent stage of conception, developers should bear in mind that whatever outcome they are going to eventually come up with, it should be ethical. What I mean by that is you don't conceive, you don't design, you don't deploy and begin to look for ethics to curb whatever aftermath the deployment has brought about. No. From the period of conception itself, developers should bear in mind that the outcome, which is the AI system, ought to be ethical right from the period of conception and through the entire life cycle of an AI system. So the first thing regarding privacy and copyright, so as not to violate it, is first to bear in mind or to have an ethical review board, because it's understood that developers might not necessarily be an ethical person. I mean, be conversant with ethics that guide AI. Okay, because in the discourse of AI, we have the technical track and the non-technical track, and they are mutually inclusive, actually. So it ought not to be that I'm a technical person, I'm not conversant with ethics of it. So they actually ought to work hand in hand. So when developers who are largely technical, when they are beginning to develop an AI system, they should constitute an ethics review board that has diverse constituents. I mean, ethics review board that have people from life and groups, especially lawyers, AI ethicists, people from minority groups, and vulnerable population. Okay, so when the ethical review board or council is diverse, they would be able to point out blind spots that may not be visible if they were not diverse. That's one. The other one is to have a robust risk management.
Yeah.
Risk assessment and management, and also disaster recovery plan. To the first one, risk assessment management. When we talk about AI systems, they could pose, having been deployed, especially if the ethical aspects of it is not well done, it could pose lots of risks and even eventual harms to the population that it's going to be making use of it. So there is a need to have that risk assessment management often in the process of development. And what I mean by disaster recovery plan is that just in case something happens and it sets them back, they are also able, I mean, it's such that they haven't lost all that they had built or all that they had worked on in the past, but they are able to bounce back. Another step is to continuously have monitor and evaluate how they are doing. Okay, monitoring and evaluation is also very important, such that you continue to ask questions. Are you ethical? Are you transparent? You know, using certain ethical principles that have been proposed, especially. So I'll stop here for now.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really interesting that you brought up is the collaboration between the technical people and the non-technical people, because obviously there's the people that code these AI models, but a career opportunity, I think, for many people that aren't necessarily interested in the coding aspect is really going to be the technical or the other aspect of it in terms of legislation and policy, especially as we go on into the future, because as there's more and more AI technology, we also need more and more people that can evaluate its ethics. And I think that's a really important point that you brought up there. So one thing was, I think this is a bit of a tedious idea, but one idea that I specifically was thinking of was when you have millions of data samples, is it actually worth the effort to check through every single one for things like bias, or would there be a more efficient way of doing something like that?
That's actually the work of an ethical review board. The kind of, initially we talked about privacy and copyright.
Yeah.
Then I made mention of looking at ethics that guide that. You don't want to violate people's privacy. You don't want to violate copyright laws, of which these two issues are very prevalent in AI systems as we have it today, that we're now looking for how to forestall such future occurrence. So it's not so much as to check each of the data one after the other. That would be too much of an Herculean task. But the ethics review board and the idea of transparency in the algorithm and in the data and eventual algorithm, it's such that after in the course of building an AI system, you having factored in, I mean, you factor in privacy laws that apply both locally and internationally, depending on where the developers are situated. But then it's also important that in the course of building of it, the data, the algorithm is such that they are not I mean, in the course of building it, you have ethics review board reviewing the process and making sure that it is up to date. So this process does not necessarily mean that they will need to look at each of the data one by one, but that in the course of gathering the data itself, they are cognizant of data that have copyright cover, so to speak, and you don't want to make use of it, or you want to take the right permission and the likes. And also when the system is being monitored and evaluated, it also can bring to light places where more works need to be done to ensure that there is no copyright infringement and that it's also not violating people's privacy. So it's a process that is kind of holistic and requires it's not a one-off process. It requires diverse stakeholder. And for a developer that is interested in building an AI system that is ethical, there shouldn't be any stone left unturned in that regard, and no much work is too much regarding that.
Yeah, I completely agree with those points. And I think the last thing that you brought up was about AI developers wanting to make AI bots that are ethical and following guidelines. But I think that there's also a certain point where some people and some developers are going to put their profits over things like ethicality of AI. And there's a conflict of interest between AI developers with responsible AI and then profiteering off of AI. I think one specific example of this is the OpenAI and then Elon Musk lawsuit, where Elon Musk stated that OpenAI wasn't staying true to their whole goal of staying as a nonprofit. And then specifically, this was more hinted at Sam Altman than the entirety of OpenAI in itself. And that really shed some light on keeping AI as a open source technology that everyone is accessible to. And clearly, the fact that this lawsuit happened illustrates that there's a conflict of interest. So when there is such a conflict of interest, how can we work to find a balance between having responsible technology, but also assuring that this technology is profitable at the same time?
Thank you very much for that question. And I like the fact that you highlighted conflicts of interest, which is a moral issue. Now, when we think about responsible AI and ethical AI, they are not in conflict. In fact, ethical AI and profiting from AI system, they ought to go pari passu. So here I see a kind of misconception or wrong perception that when an AI system is ethical, it might detract from the profit margin of it. So I think that there should be, I like to make an analogy here between, there is some school of thought that think that talking about ethics in business is oxymoronic, such that they think that when you talk about business, ethics has nothing to do with that. But that is completely wrong because ethics, studies have shown that ethics even helps business to stay in business and to make more money, to make more profit. Okay. And it is also that when the masses, when the populace, when they know that a business is ethical, investors want to invest in it, consumers want to buy the product. Now, compared to if an organization, maybe a multinational into business, is known to always flouting ethical rules, riding roughshod or testing their products that are not yet certified, that can potentially harm population, testing it, we as consumers and even investors, we wouldn't want to associate with such business. So the same thing relates with ethical AI and the ability to make profits by developers. So I think that they should look at it as their orientation, their perception and attitude to ethics in AI system should be jiggled to understand that by the time your system is ethical as much as possible, as much as desired as it ought to be, it is even a greater selling point for you as a developer in terms of your AI system, because then you wouldn't probably be violating any rights, any copyright laws, any privacy, and people would have more confidence in you, and that would actually shoot your product to the limelight. So the summary of this is that ethics does not stifle innovation.
Yeah, and thank you so much for that. I think that definitely sheds some light on the idea that you can increase consumer confidence by having AI technology that's going to be transparent with everything, especially seeing the transparency is really important to developing the best and the most usable technology that's inclusive. But I think there are certain instances where there might be guidelines that are breached by companies. And so in those cases, what system or methods for management can we use to hold AI developers accountable when they do end up breaching these guidelines, even if it's like a rare occasion?
Wow, thank you very much, Ishan. You ask very smart questions that have been on my mind, dear to my heart. Now, we have tons of proposals on ethics of AI. How should we regulate it? We know that the Secretary General of United Nations, Antonio Guterres, recently last year constituted an advisory body on ethics of AI. UNESCO itself has been doing lots of work regarding ethics of AI. It has a recommendation in 2021 on ethics of AI, and also another one on the use of generative AI in teaching and research. So we have tons of it, and lots more are coming up. So what I would think is that enough of talks. Can we begin to implement? Can we begin to implement some of these things? Can we begin to bring violators to book? Can we begin to sanction? And even in recent times, we see all the news about the OECD Act, AI Act, and the likes. So enough of talks, I would say. And so what I think we need much more now is to begin to implement some of those recommendations.
Yeah.
In particular, the recommendation of UNESCO on the on ethics of AI, because it is quite robust. It even has policy sections and how to go about it, ratified by 193 countries. Yes, but implementation is also very important, and that's where I think the world and all these international and even regional bodies should be looking at now. Let
Yeah.
us begin to implement. Let us begin to bring people to books. Let us begin to call people out. You violated this.
Yeah.
What is the sanction? Yes, that's what I think.
I completely agree with that because we see that in many legislative policies that are being put out, like even President Biden's executive order on AI, which is certainly a great start for regulation, especially in the United States. But even with Europe's new guidelines, for example, they might be a bit more robust than the US's to a certain extent. But all of them still are pretty vague about what the consequences are if someone's going to commit a mistake. And that's where I think your point really comes in because we're outlining exactly what companies need to do, but it's really, I think, that we need to take the action when there's blatant violations, because unless we take action, that's just going to give room to people to keep violating the same rules time and time again for their own cause, even though that's one of the most unethical things that they can do. So thank you for providing insights on that. Yeah. And the second, I want to move on to the second portion of today's interview. And I really want to learn more about your work at the Center for AI and Digital Policy, which is obviously a big institution when it comes to AI legislation and policy around the world. So the first question I want to ask is, can you just explain a bit about what you research and what types of policy you like to look at the Center for AI and Digital Policy?
Great question. Yes, just as you said, Center for AI and Digital Policy is a big organization, non-profit, that is into AI policies and also developing human-centric alongside democratic values of AI. So, as a research fellow there, I search, sift, basically conduct research on AI. I analyze AI policy. Like there's a particular country allotted to me and my group to research on, and we also take I also take courses, lectures on some of these various recommendations. Also, we look out for significant AI policy news per country, you know, per country. So basically, I'm contributing to developing the Artificial Intelligence Democratic Value Index, the one for 2023 that will soon be out. So we are in the process of doing that. And so as a research fellow, what I do is to conduct research, read materials, analyze policies, look at even past AIDV, Artificial Intelligence and Democratic Values Index, and try to build up on that. Look for significant AI news pertaining to certain countries that I have been, excuse me, that have been allotted, and try to come up with what those countries, against certain parameters, 12 parameters actually. So I've worked on whether the particular country has algorithmic transparency, whether that particular country has adopted UNESCO recommendation on AI ethics that I made mention of
Sorry.
earlier, whether that particular country has also started implementing it, whether whether they ratify the OECD General Privacy Act, against certain parameters. I conduct research on AI policy and analyze such policies as well.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I really want to look at as you describe the work that you do is what sort of, I guess, is there any guidelines on exactly how you're going to analyze this policy? Maybe like a checklist that you'd like to look at. Is there anything of that sort that you specifically use to analyze a certain policy and if it's meeting its goals?
Yes, yes, there is. For at KDIP, that Center for AI and Digital Policy, we usually bring out an index called AI and Democratic Value Index. So there are 12 parameters that we look at. The ones I have worked on are majorly 4 parameters for a particular country. I don't want to mention the country. I'm not sure I won't be breaking any law, okay, or any rule. So for a particular country. So regarding the country I have been allotted that I've been working on, I mentioned it earlier, I have looked at whether that country has algorithmic transparency, whether that country has adopted UNESCO recommendation on AI ethics, whether the country is implementing. So beyond adoption, just as I said earlier, there is a need to begin to implement. Maybe in subsequent years, in the near future, KDIP will begin to look for, are they applying sanction, okay, but not yet. Whether they've started implementing the UNESCO recommendation on AI ethics, regarding the General Privacy Act or something, GPA, of OECD, based on 2018, 2021, and 2023, whether that particular country has ratified it, something like that. Those are some of the parameters I am working on. Other groups are working on other parameters, but specifically, those are the 4 ones I work on.
Yeah, and thank you for telling me about that. I think one thing that I want to look at specifically in these guidelines and the work that you've done in the past few months or years is, have you specifically found any sort of policy that you found maybe to be really good and taking us in the right path, or any sort of policy that you think is really alarming that we need to change? Anything like that that you've encountered?
Thank you very much. Yes, not like this particular policy is alarming or something. I will explain. The UNESCO recommendation on AI ethics, I said earlier that is a very robust document, all-encompassing. The policy area of it, in policy 6 is gender. So the gender, it's well-crafted. It's also all-encompassing, touching on pertinent areas that we ought to be looking at. But I disagree a little bit on the focus on STEM. That's science, technology, engineering, and what's the M now?
Mathematics, I believe.
And mathematics. Okay, so in a bid to encourage women to, more women, you know, there is a dearth of women in tech.
Yeah.
So in a bid to encourage that, there is the emphasis that women should be encouraged to take up, to study STEM. I think that we shouldn't de-emphasize arts and humanities because we want to emphasize the sciences. I don't know if you get, but that's what the UNESCO recommendation on AI ethics, the policy section 6 that details gender, that's what it says. So I think that, you know, we shouldn't think that, we should encourage women to take up all positions. And when it gets to policy area, we shouldn't de-emphasize one in order to emphasize one. The reason is that it's possible. I am being futuristic now. It's possible that at a later time, we might begin to think that we now have fewer women in arts and humanities and we need to encourage it again. More importantly, you know, the way science and technology is going, especially in the world of AI, there is a need for more humanized technology. Technology to become human and humane, to be at the service of humanity, you know, not to contravene human values. You know, in AI now, we're talking about human-centric AI. So I think based on that, there is a need not to tacitly, inadvertently de-emphasize art and humanities in a bid to emphasize STEM. So I rather think that we should be talking about STEAM, that's having A in between, A covering art and humanity. So this actually is not like, it's not the way you describe it, but I kind of disagree with the emphasis on STEM when the issue of gender is discussed as it relates to technology and AI. We should say STEAM, everything. Okay, thank you.
No, I completely agree with that. I think one of the most robust aspects of AI is that it can be applied to almost anything. Take it in the arts, where now we're seeing that there's like crazy pieces of artwork that look really beautiful that are being generated by AI tools. But then there's also things like text and speech generation, things like robots, autonomous cars, and I can keep going on and on because that's how diverse of a technology AI is. And I think as we continue to increase diversity and find people to work in I think we need to promote people working in AI across many different areas. It's not like if you're not interested in science technology that AI isn't for you. I think AI is something that anyone can get into in a certain sector that they like themselves. And the other thing
If
is, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
if I may quickly jump in just from the points you made, my background is not in science. My first degree is in philosophy. My background is philosophy. Okay, so it's not like I studied science, STEM, any of the STEM subjects. No, but I found my way into the world of AI. Okay, through through my interest in ethics, in bioethics, then I move on to examining AI ethics. So we could have people like that as well. We could have women getting into the tech world through that without necessarily emphasizing or de-emphasizing arts and humanities and emphasizing STEM at the expense. So all I think we need to do is to create an awareness, women should take more position in certain areas. It doesn't matter how they come into it. They could come into it through arts and humanities as I have,
Yeah.
actually.
No,
That's my point.
that's a perfect example to give because coming from philosophy to AI, obviously there's not like a direct link that you can cave back like you could from STEM, but obviously that shows that people can come from many different areas and get into AI. And that's one aspect that I think we should certainly appreciate about it. But with that being said, I think that concludes off today's interview. And thank you so much for taking the time out of your day.
Ishan, thank you very much for having me.
Of
And
course.
well done. You're doing a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And for anyone watching this, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below.